Larry Chen might be the most famous car photographer on the planet. Larry grew up in Southern California. He got into car shooting after high school, after a few other jobs. He sold computers out of the back of his Nissan S13. He was a celebrity paparazzi shooter. He didn't go to college. And early on, he discovered a very old rule. If you work harder than the next guy, things start to happen. Now, photography and cars were Larry's hobby. He started taking shooting seriously about 2004 or so, and when he did that, he made it his mission to be working constantly, virtually every weekend, for years. In a lot of ways, Larry was a branch of Southern California import car culture for people who didn't live there. He shot events no one else shot that mainstream car media wouldn't touch, mostly because they were too small or too grassroots or too scruffy or whatever. In 2022, Larry Chen has 675,000 Instagram followers. He is a Canon featured artist with a client list that includes Toyota, Hoonigan, and Monster Energy. He has been to more than 50 countries for work. He has shot every 24-hour race on Earth, and he is the only man behind a camera in this business whose name means something to teenagers in small-town America. Here's the best part, though. I wanted to talk to him for this podcast because he believes in a very specific way that he is really not any good. He is, of course, very good. But that's Larry. That attitude, that constant drive to move past what he views as a weakness, it's part of why he is who he is and why he's made the difference he has. I'm Sam Smith. I'm a journalist and a club racer, and I love stories. This is a podcast about what happens when life doesn't go as we want. Welcome to Driven to Fail. I can't get enough of talking to pro shooters in this business, right? Photographers in the car business, if they're at all successful, if their name at all, you are one of the biggest names in the industry, right? But if their name at all, most of them just have a monster work ethic. And you clearly do. You're seemingly everywhere all the time, on the road constantly, and you've been doing that for more than a decade. Your work ethic has been like this most of your career. But what I find really interesting is that you didn't always want to be a shooter, and you kind of arrived at this after trying some other things. You told somebody once that after high school, you had other gigs before you went all in on photography. You fixed and sold computers out of your parents' house. You had other business ventures. Like what were those ventures? And more important, when you walked away from them, how did you know they weren't going to pan out? How did you know they were done? How do you decide to shut something down and move on like that early?
Yeah. When I started out working or becoming part of the workforce outside of high school, it was just survival mode. It was just a way to pay rent. It was a way to kind of get through life. I actually didn't really know what I wanted to do. So that's kind of why I got into computers, because I was into PC gaming. It kind of translated, I just forced myself to know how to work on computers, how to fix computers. So I did that and I hustled, man. I sold thousands of computers, and I can't tell you how many telemarketer offices used my computers. And I think I said this in a couple other podcasts. Like I can tell you how many ATX cases I could fit in a S13 hatchback at one point. That's what I did, and it wasn't my passion. I enjoyed doing it. And I did other odd jobs. I did so many things just to get by. And I looked at photography, I looked at cars, and I looked at that whole world from the outside, and I just envied it so much. I wanted to be a part of it so bad. And I knew people that were successful in the industry back then, and I just kind of saw their drive. I saw what they were doing, and I was thinking, like, I was kind of weighing the options of seeing if there was room for somebody like me to be in it. What I didn't know is that what I know now is that there's plenty of room for everybody that wants to do it. In fact, now more than ever, there's so much room, but there's just not enough people that are willing to have the drive and put in the time for it.
So this was 20 years ago. This was early 2000s, right?
Yeah. So I graduated high school in 2002, And pretty much since then, I just started doing what I could. I never went to college.
Yeah.
Since then, I just started doing anything I could, I guess, hustling to get to this point,
How did you when you decided to go to dive into shooting, and it was because everything else both wasn't what you wanted to do, but also didn't seem to lead somewhere. Did you think shooting would go anywhere, or was it just you had to follow? Like, were you following something internally, like your gut, or was it just this seems like a better idea? How did you make that call?
So at the time, there wasn't social media. There was forums, there was like email groups, and I was part of like some Nissan car clubs locally in Southern California. And I would go to these car clubs and I would take pictures. And I mean, they weren't any good, but the difference is they existed. Does that make sense? Like somebody
Yeah,
took the
totally.
pictures at all. And the fact that I made these pictures and they existed meant they were the best pictures there. And that somehow kept continuing, including when I started going to the track with my 1972 40Z. I bought that when I turned 21, my birthday. I bought it for $3,000. The next day, I took it to autocross, and like the group of friends that I kind of grew up with in the car world, we legitimately went to the track. We did track days, drift days, autocross, gymkhana. Like we were very early in the forefront of that SoCal car culture. And when I was there, I would always bring my camera and I would always take pictures. And like it was just such a low level of doing what I'm doing now. But I realized that some people do this on a grander scale for a living. And I just needed to pursue that. So there was one point, I'm trying to think what year that was, where I just said to myself, like, this is it. I have to quit everything. I have to quit autocross. I have to quit track driving, modifying cars. I have to sell as much as I can, all the stuff that I don't need to pursue this form of photography, just automotive photography. And yeah, I just grinded for a long time.
Did you? Okay,
I
wait.
would.
So that's crazy, right? So you were in this moment where doing what you loved meant, or chasing what you loved meant giving up everything else that you loved. And so many people trip on that, right? They look at that as, okay, I could go that direction, but I failed because I don't have all these other things that matter to me. Did you ever have any in the months and the years that followed before, or however long it took before things really clicked and you knew you were on the right path? Did you have any moments where you looked around and thought, oh, holy crap, I sold all this stuff. I don't have anything. I'm what did I do? Right? Did that hit or no?
Yeah, well, I think for me, it was so much like, I mean, it's tough to say now when I look back on it. It seemed like things were right, because along the way I was having the most fun, and I remember I would go to these events. There was one point, and a lot of professional drivers now, even in Formula Drift, will kind of remind me of this period of time where I would drive, to Vegas, to NorCal, to Arizona, or any of the local tracks that I can actually reach to, and I would go there to like some drift practice day, and I would set up my laptop and I would take pictures, and I had a stack of CDs with me. And if anybody wanted the pictures that I took of their car from that event, I would burn the CD and I would sell it for $20. And there was one point when I kind of realized that I could guarantee 20 CD sales, which would just pay for my gas and my I wouldn't I wouldn't get lodging because I would sleep on the floor of somebody's hotel room, or I would sleep at a friend's house or their
Yeah.
couch or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was just enough for me to eke by to be able to do it. And I just wanted to do it. And when I feel like when I had my first big break when I started working for EA Electronic Arts, um, shooting, for Speed Hunters and being a part of an editorial team. I remember there was this moment where, like, every morning I would be at the track or at some event or whatever, 24 hours of spa or shooting in Europe somewhere. I would spring up. Doesn't matter what time of night I went to sleep the night before. And I would basically, like, 6 a.m., whatever, anytime we needed to go to the track, I would spring up and I would just be so excited. I would be so happy because I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm doing my dream job. But then I look in the mirror and I think to myself, one day it's going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to wake up. It's so early to go to the track or whatever. I was kind of like pre-thinking that eventually I would get tired of it.
Yeah.
But, even though now I have to suffer a lot, like even just last week we were back at Pikes Peak. For whatever reason, this year we went to Pikes Peak 4 times. And it seems like it's going to just get more and more frequent just because of how relevant that mountain is.
Yeah.
But like, we had to wake up at 2:30 a.m. this last time, and then on race day or race week, we have to wake up at 12:30 a.m., which means we have to go to sleep at 5 p.m.
God.
To get some sleep at all. But when we're in those situations, yeah, it sucks so much, and we're physically hurting. But I still have that spark, and that's kind of what's taken me to this point.
So earlier you said something about, starting out and how the stuff you shot wasn't any good. And it's all, everybody's on an arc, right? And if you're any good, you're constantly trying to suck less. And you may not have sucked yesterday, but eventually you'll look back on that and try and get better, right? Because if you're not, everybody I know who makes anything for a living, they're all doing it because they like getting better and they like tweaking the process, right? And a while back, I read something talking about creativity and how we think, and it orbited the idea that when you're starting out, you've consumed all this work that you love, and you don't know who you are yet as an artist, but you have all this taste built up because you just inhaled all this amazing work that you respect and like, and just really want, maybe to emulate in your own way, but you don't know how to produce the good, but you know what the good is. And the point is the point is that early on it can be so frustrating because your taste hasn't caught up with your skill. Like not you not you specifically, but anybody who makes anything. And there was this specific quote in this interview I read that was something like, your taste is why you hate what you make. But in other words, it basically just means that everyone has to learn. It's all a climb. And if you're any good, that climb is a whole career because you never stop trying. But what's so interesting to me is the beginning of that process, because it's like any other skill or pastime you learn, where you learn 80% of what you need to know in the first 20%, and then the last 20% takes the rest of the time. Early on, what was that process like for you when you were going from a guy who had shot a handful of events to you're on the way to becoming well and truly fully formed Larry Chen, that you are now, right? How did you go about learning to get better?
I mean, one of the things that I say even now, I feel like there's certain things that I've learned and certain, I guess, experiences that I've had over the years and I use those to improve my photography. And I say this as honest as possible. I feel like I'm not a very good technical photographer, if that makes sense. In terms of, like, just basic, if there's a scene there, I would say it's not that it's harder for me to pick out the scene and the right photo or the best photo. I just need more attempts at it, and that's kind of one of the things that I developed over time, right?
Okay.
And which means I have to show up earlier than every other photographer, and I have to stay later, and I have to stay more days, and I have to have that edge, that unfair advantage. And a lot of that comes from equipment, so I pride myself in using, Canon cameras and also the best equipment, the newest equipment, and the newest glass and technology to my advantage to improve my shots. because you are your own worst critic. But I look at my peers, I look at the people that I started shooting with, and even if we're at the same event, same track, the technical, how savvy these other people are, when I look at the pictures, I'm like, I just didn't see that. How did they see that? I didn't see that. But if they're done with their shot and they're already gone, I'm still trying. I'm still trying because I need those extra attempts. I need those extra chances. And then from that, maybe I can equal their technical prowess, or their just the framing, or just the composition, color. I just need that time, and I build that in, and I feel like that's just something that I've developed over
You
time.
you realize how, and I mean this as a compliment. You realize how insane it is for you to sit here and say that you're not a technically accomplished photographer. Like
But I
your
mean,
work's
but
incredible, man. And
it's the truth. It is fully the truth, and I believe me, I wish it was the other way, where I could put in this time and I was super technical and I was super able to like just grab those frames out of thin air.
yeah,
There are certain photographers that I look at their work, and they are the decisive moment photographer. Their finger is so fast and ready to go anytime. They're the predictive photographer. There's just so many ones that maybe even have like the most steady hands, or the best panners, or I see those and I'm like so jealous of their skill. But that's a good thing, because it's something for me to push for. It's something that kind of gives me inspiration to push harder. And I really like that exists, because what's the fun if you're just competing against yourself? You should be just I guess comparing yourself to all your peers, because that everybody will kind of elevate each other's work that way. um but yeah, I also, before we get into it deeper, I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned
yeah, of course.
before we started recording, about failing over and over. The crazy thing is, it's getting to a point where uh we're kind of we're still a small crew. It's 6 of us now, and we all work toward this one goal, which is to create amazing content. The Hagerty show, capturing car culture, is pretty much our main focus now, and that's on the editorial side. On the
Yeah,
commercial side, of course, Toyota, Nissan, Ford,
right.
big brands like Yokohama, Pennzoil. That's what we focus on the commercial side. On the editorial side, instead of doing this magazine, this website, this whatever, no, Hagerty and our own YouTube, like whatever bleeds over. If we have extra content, we put it on YouTube. Uh, the thing is, with all 6 of us, we fail every single day, nonstop. I mean, you think you've figured out everything in terms of what we do. Like, it seems so simple. Here's a car, let's take pictures and video of this car. Or here's an event, let's take pictures and video of this event. Or here's this whatever car culture moment, or this race, or whatever. You think that we've kind of seen it all because we've been shooting for so long, and the collective hours of shooting, and the collective amount of pictures and
Right.
hours of videos
6
between
people.
all of
Yeah.
us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's not enough, because it seems there's something that goes wrong every single day, and we learn so much, because part of it is that there's really no way to prep for this. I just, there's just no way. I mean, I guess it's the same way with all types of work, especially in the car industry. Anything can go wrong at any moment. Racing, same thing, whether it be drag racing, drifting, off road. There's just so many variables. Whatever you think, like a good example is like Steph Papadakis, right, of the Toyota drift team, with Frederick and Ryan Turk. Like, he looks at these things that break, and he's like, There's no way I ever thought this would break, but it broke, and I have to redesign it. And that's kind of the cool thing, seeing what will fail. And it's the same way with what we do. Like, we have redundancy on this backup, on that backup. And it's like 3 backups fail. And it's like, why didn't we have a 4th backup? What's wrong with you? Like, how could you be so dumb to not have a 4th backup?
Right.
But that's just where we're at now. Like, the stuff that we do, it's ridiculous.
But that's
It's
the thing,
insane.
right? I mean, because
Yeah.
if you could plan for it, it wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't be something going wrong, right? And the more you do it, it's like, you watch teams that go to Le Mans and they have, like Porsche will show up with the entire, 3 entire spare cars and containers, every contingency planned for down to a 1,000-row spreadsheet, and then there's still something that's not on that 1,000-row spreadsheet that knocks them out and everything goes dead. And, everybody has
Exactly.
to cry.
Exactly.
But I love the idea of any job that runs without catch or safety net. And I've talked to pro shooters who have had bodies die and lenses die and the CF cards go apart. But on some level, you talked earlier about the idea that there are creative fails. There are you mentioned mechanical fails. The idea of even just not getting a shot, like missing it, right? And photography is so interesting because there are so many ways it can come apart. There are, it can be a thing that is the fuzzy gray space where you look at it and you go, that is not Larry Chen's best work today. And everybody else looks at it and go, what are you talking about? That's a 10 out of 10. That's amazing. And then on the other end of it, there's the stuff that could be seen as a technical failure, but isn't. Like a really good example is like Frank Capra on D-Day, right? In Normandy in World War II. He goes to the Normandy landing in a landing craft with a bunch of soldiers, has like 6 rolls of film in his pocket. Half of them get drenched. They get 11 frames out of the whole day. And they're some of the most iconic pictures of the war, and none of them's in focus. And they're all awful, like technically speaking, they're awful pieces of photography, but they're amazing pieces of art. And I love the idea that you work in this, you guys, anybody who does what you do, but you especially, you work in this weird intersection of art and science and commerce and things that you can control and things that you can't control. How do you, like when you're heading off to a day where there's going to be a bunch of things you can't control, and that things, a lot of it is a juggle and there's some dice roll. How do you wrap your head around that? How do you think about it?
It's funny. Like that happened to us last night. So we were shooting in downtown LA till 2:30 a.m.
Oh my God.
And it's a very common theme for me, and you can ask any one of my guys how like my mood goes as like shoots go.
Yeah.
Basically, I am so upset and I'm like pacing and nervous and just not happy until I get one good shot. Then it just like, because I'm like pushing so hard. Where's that first one? Where's that first good one? Where is it? It's somewhere here. And then somehow it happens. Who knows how? And I look at it. I'm like, oh, boom, mood's good. Let's push hard. Let's keep pushing, and let's keep making sure we have good shots. I can't tell you how many times it's like that. I mean, I think it's like that pretty much every time, especially the really high pressure ones.
Yeah.
When it really matters, when it comes down to it, like when, for example, when Nissan asks us to do the worldwide launch of the new Z, that's such an important car of our generation, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like, people are going to get their first impression on this car from my pictures, and that's super important. I wouldn't say it's a make or break, but it kind of is. First impression is pretty important, and that's kind of why, especially a company like Nissan, Ford, all the OEMs, they're such sticklers on leaks, right? Because if it's something that leaks and it's so badly lit and it's pixelated and it's ugly, everyone's first impression on the leaked car is like, oh, this is trash. So you just want it to be as good as possible. And, I take that really to heart. Like, I'm very prideful of the work. I can't not be, if we're not prideful of the work and if we're not in love with it, then it's just no point. It's just, for us, I just don't want to shoot boring cars. I don't want to shoot ugly cars. I want to shoot the best looking cars, and I want to make them look as good as possible.
So you mentioned corporate gigs, right? And one of the interesting things about your career is that you are deeply grassroots. You'll be literally in the weeds at an event, like drifting at Gingerman or Irwindale. You are there, and you are at some of the largest pro races in the world, and you are shooting new cars, and you are shooting bits and pieces and parts, and like there is, you are so all over the map in terms of what you do and how you do it, and very, very good at all of it. But the risk, that element of risk and that element of unknowable varies, right? Some gigs are one end of the spectrum, and some gigs are the other. Is a is a gig more interesting, or does it does it become more interesting when there's more risk of things going wrong, or is it just like, okay, that's something we have to think about? It's there. It's just one more piece of the puzzle.
I think definitely the more complicated ones are obviously they give me a lot more stress, and it takes a lot more effort for us to plan for something like that, which generally speaking, a riskier gig means something that is there's just a lot more things that can go wrong, and if we fall really hard. But I feel like I've worked enough in this industry where I can take a certain calculated risk, and I know what we can do to fall back on, or what what we're capable of. And I think the reason why people like to hire us is because of the reliability factor. Not so much, again, it may not be the best photos or video.
Larry, shut up.
We
God,
we
you're
may be the
really
B
good at
team.
this.
No,
God, man, come on.
I'm just saying, it's a reliability thing.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
will end up with something, and that's the key. The worst is to have a team out shooting something, a new car release, or a new tire release, or new wheels, or whatever, new event, and you just end up with nothing. It even comes down to how methodical we are about making sure the equipment is safe, our backups are good. You know, I just it's crazy to me how casual a lot of photographers and videographers are about
Yeah,
equipment,
yeah.
especially traveling the world. Things get stolen, things break. We're so methodical. Like any restaurant we go to, got to make sure we have all of our stuff with us, no matter how much of a hassle it is. Hotels, whatever. Like it is so crazy, and part of it is that I've taught the guys through experience what we need to do to make sure we have the highest chance of success for our clients. And part of that is whatever, just doing anything we can to make sure our stuff is safe.
Oh, that makes sense. You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, being around situations where things go wrong, right? And like, a lot of your work resembles, sports or wire shooting, or, just field work where you can't control what you're shooting, and you have a very narrow window in which to catch it and to keep moving, and then you have to move on to the next thing, right? Is it, I mean, the definition of that job means that you are around when things go ape, right? When
Mhm.
cars blow up, when cars crash, when people get really hurt, when somebody spends 6 months putting together a drift car, a race car, whatever it is, puts their life into a thing, and then all of a sudden that is wiped out, boom, gone in 2 seconds, right? Is it
That's
ever, what's it
that's
like? I mean, is it ever weird to watch
that's the
somebody come apart and know that you have to kind of be coldly just, yeah, 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 no, 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 I got it. You're
well,
there,
that's the
right?
crazy thing is I'm so glad you brought that up. We have the easy job. We're just there to capture it. The hard job is the blood, sweat, and tears that go into actually racing or putting your life on the line. All of that. I don't even get to experience a fraction of that. I lucky enough where I get to drive sometimes
Yeah.
on the amateur level, drifting, whatever. I like to get behind the wheel, and then I also like to wrench on an amateur level. I'm very candid about the fact that I'm a photographer first. I'm a car enthusiast also, so I'm not the best at building cars, working on cars. With that said, we are building a SEMA car this year for Toyota, a GR86, and even though it's such a simple car, it's a bolt-on car, and it's just made for drifting and light road racing, time attack, autocross, whatever. It's the best version of that bolt-on car we can build, and we're still running into so many issues. And I couldn't imagine the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into these cars that are just of the best, top level with their racecraft and all that. And all we have to do is just show up with our equipment and just take pictures of it. Or what blows my mind now is, especially on the YouTube side for our channel or Hagerty, somebody spends who knows how many man hours on this build, and I show up, and in 1 hour or less, I talk to the owner. I'm like, all right, tell us about this. So now tell me about this. So tell me about the hardship you had to do to get this thing to fit, or this thing to work, or this
Right.
system to talk to each other. And like I wouldn't say I own it, but like
But then
I've
you're done.
captured
Yeah.
it now.
Yeah,
And
that's it.
I'm
Months
done.
or years of their life, just boom, and then it's out, right?
Jeez, it's crazy to me. And it blows my mind, especially when people message me and tell me, like, hey, I've been building this car for like the past 5 years or even 10 years. I can't wait for it to get to the level, or once it's finished, for you to come take pictures of it. And when I break that down, that could mean me stopping by for 5 minutes if it's parked on the side of a racetrack or whatever, or it could mean going to a meet and I just snap a picture of it with my cell phone, or it could mean, hey, I'm going to spend the whole day on it and do a capturing car culture episode on it. Like there's so many different levels to that thought, or just that idea of me taking pictures of a car.
Is it? But when you're sitting there behind the lens and somebody is having this deeply emotional moment, you kind of downplay it because you're there. All you do is take the picture. They're having either heartbreak or an amazing day, the best day of their life. Doesn't matter what it is. Like, you're just there. But when is it weird to be? A lot of like musicians talk about having the instrument in front of them. The instrument insulates them from the crowd. Like, guitar players used to say that it protects me from everybody out there. The guitar is my shield. Photographers have told me the same thing, but I know that's an isolating thing, and you've got the camera there and you're doing a job. But is it ever weird to be watching again somebody's great day, somebody's awful day, and knowing that you can't really get involved? I mean, you can have feelings, but you're just kind of there doing the job while they are living this deep life that may not be the best day in the world, right? How does that?
Yeah, I think that really just comes down to what you think, or your thought is
Yeah,
on photography. I followed a lot of AP, Reuters, conflict photographers,
yeah,
wire photographers. I followed them pretty heavily when I was just starting out, just because I loved the dedication that they put into not making pictures, but good pictures. And so much effort and so much actual physical pain, and just so much of their life dedicated to making these good pictures. And it's definitely not for it's definitely not for other people. I feel like it's definitely for themselves. It's just to give them a sense of being or whatever. But I kind of took that a little bit, and I feel like that's just something that I do now. I just do my job the best I can do, and my
yeah,
job is to tell that story, whether it's good or bad.
right.
Of course, I focus on the good, because I am a car enthusiast and I want to play my part. I want to do my part to save the culture that we love and to improve it and to inspire people. So my favorite thing to do now is to reveal cool builds, reveal inspiring builds, and maybe inspire other people to take pictures. That's really something that is a big part of what I do now, at events, or the classes I used to do before the shutdown with Canon. So much of what I've been able to accomplish comes from the education side of what I do. Recently, and this is the first time I'm talking about it, besides a story post that I put up 2 days ago. Recently, Intel, out of all companies, reached out to me. Uh, this kind of came full circle with my gaming background, and if you could see the PC I'm on, um, that's on an Intel i9 processor. Since I started working with computers, and since I started in building computers, I've always worked with Intel, and I've always been a PC nerd. I use a Google phone. I'm I wouldn't say I'm anti-Apple, but it just naturally means that I don't have any Apple products. But like I'm so hyper focused on doing things the way I like doing them. Intel, for whatever reason, they notice and they want to help me on the educational side of things too. So now I'm one of the speakers at Adobe Max this year, which is really,
Oh,
really
cool.
big and really important
Yeah.
because for the first time, I'm actually going to go through my entire process from taking pictures all the way to publish. And I'm going to show everything in terms of like the MSI computer I use, the Canon camera, how I choose the pictures, how I edit them, how to export. Uh, yeah, the education side of keeping this culture alive and keeping it afloat is so important to me. And just working with these good companies really kind of helps.
I love that, man. And I love, you mentioned earlier the idea of positivity, right? And optimism. And one of the things that I find really interesting about, and you see it in newspaper reporters, you see it in professional shooters, you see it in writers and novelists, and anybody who kind of enters into a career where from the outside, the day to day can be a grind, or there can be, a lot of outside forces that make it less than positive. But and you see it really commonly with journalists, partly because the journalism business is collapsing and has been for 20 years. But this idea that after a long enough time in a business doing a certain kind of work, you just kind of veer towards cynicism and pessimism, and that's its own kind of failure. I think this notion that you get so rooted in how things have always been and how what's different from when you started, that you stop focusing on what's positive about it, and the idea of just time jading people in general, right? I like the fact that you are optimistic about it and you focus on that stuff because it's important. And so much of the culture is it's so divisive. It so comes down to you are this and not that. I like these cars and not that. Those are not my people and these are. And when it really doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, I think when you start doing this industry, you have a choice of being positive about things or being negative, maybe. I guess I kind of ride that line. I'm, yeah, I am a journalist, and I've been in positions more where I'm more just that storyteller. I have to be neutral, but because of the path that I chose now, and because of the shows that we have, and our voice, on social or on editorial or on YouTube, I just choose to be positive. I know a lot of people get a lot of views and get a lot of notoriety for maybe being half and half, negative and positive, or maybe more negative. But I don't know. For me, it's just about positivity and just kind of want to pump up everybody, no matter what you're into. You could be into lowriders, you could be into low and slow, slammed, whatever. There's just something to appreciate about all of it. And while it's funny every now and then to see the memes making fun of a certain uh,
Right.
car culture aspect, it is somebody loves it for some reason, and good for them.
Which is funny, right? The dichotomy, though, because on the one hand, everything you just said is real and I believe it. And on the other hand, part of being an artist is looking at what you've made and not liking it and zeroing in on what you don't like about it. And earlier you talked about, the fact that you aren't the kind of shooter that you want to be, whether it's today or 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and that you're constantly working to improve that. A lot of writers I know and some musicians won't go back and look at or listen to their old work, even the good stuff, the stuff that they ostensibly like, that other people say is great and that people generally appreciated, because all they see is the stuff that they've learned not to do. they see a version of who they were creating, and they're now not that. And it can come across as cringe. It can come across as, well, that was me last week. That's not me now. I'm a different person. Blah blah blah. But do you ever go back and look at your own old work, and if so, do you look for anything in particular in it? Is it
Yeah,
important to have a relationship with the stuff you've done before, even if you don't like it?
yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned that. I was going through my archive yesterday, and I do it kind of year by year. I have a pretty I have a very extensive archive of my life's work, in that I can go to any picture that I've taken ever, since I started, within whatever 5 seconds. But I have a certain amount that I choose every single year that I consider my best of, and it's a very good representation of what I shot that year. And it's hovers about 200, between 200 to 300 photos per year. And I constantly look at it. And the reason why I was looking at it yesterday was because we were sourcing photos for one of our Capturing Car Culture episodes, featuring Von Ginn Jr.
Yeah.
And, I followed pretty much his entire career, but I look back at my photos, and I feel like I'm the opposite of musicians, because I look at my technique, and I look at maybe the limitations that I had back then, in terms of technology, in terms of just everything, access even. And I look at it, I'm like, how the heck did I create those pictures back then? I'm like, oh my God, what did I have to go through to make these?
Right.
And how can I be just as good? It's really hard, because I try to top every single year, but it's very hard, because it's just impossible. I mean, locations maybe not exist anymore, or cars get destroyed, or things aren't the same for whatever reason. And I'm honestly, physically, I'm slower.
But
I'm
that's
older,
yeah.
and maybe I might not be able to stay up as long, or keep up, or run as fast, or climb as many rocks, whatever. And I just think about that, and I look at the pictures. I'm like, wow. I just think about that picture. I was knee deep in water, and I was just up for whatever 20 hours, and I got that, and
Yeah.
it's going to live on forever, and I'm never going to be able to get better than that. That's the kind of crazy thing, looking back at my archive. I don't know. It kind of goes up and down, but I also know what I've had to focus on kind of changes the way I shoot, and the
Yeah.
way my best photos work out. Like, there was a certain point in my career when I had the time to, from start to finish, have a hand in the photos, have the I'm the only one to touch those photos. And maybe that's not the case anymore, because of how much we shoot. I might have to have somebody cull through some things, or I'll do final color on it, or whatever. But it's just really tough to have ultimate control on everything now, because of the amount of things we do. And also, maybe a lot of the things we do aren't as picturesque, maybe. um it's not like we're shooting 24 hours of Le Mans every year.
Yeah.
It's
But I mean,
not like we're
that's
shooting at
part of it.
Nürburgring every year. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so some years we do things that are prettier than others, and that's part of it. But I remember there was a block of years where I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting to shoot all these great events and these great things, and I can spend all the time in the world to make sure that the color is perfect. I took out all the porta potties of the shots, and like there's just things that I can do, but now I can't even do that. Now I can't even have the time to do certain things, that the most basic things, because of the amount of things that we're doing, which is not so bad, really. Maybe my pictures suffer in the end of the year, but now I have so much to show for. Like, I look at our YouTube channel, I look at all the things that we're able to cover, and I look at all the big car launches that we get to do, and it's just really something else. It's I'm just so happy to be able to do this stuff.
But that's interesting, right? Because that's the difference in, it's evolving from being a one man band to running a business that, like you said, is six guys working constantly, churning thousands of images every year, right? I don't know. I love talking. I'm fascinated about it. Fascinated with how people view their own work and how they create. I've been a journalist, a writer for 20 odd years. And I started at a car magazine in Michigan about 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And the woman who ran it was a woman named Jean Jennings. And every month she would sit down and she would write a column on the back page of the book. And it was just this like 1,000 words, single page, header headshot, like back when that sort of stuff defined how the industry worked, right? You'd see something in a column, the column was an important voice, and then that person, yada, yada, yada. But I remember I had no idea. Like I showed up, I literally got the job by saying I would sweep floors and clean toilets, right? And all I wanted to do was be a writer. All I wanted to do was be around cars. And I show up and I talked to her one day because she was sitting down and she had like 3 hours left before deadline. And she had to make this column from nothing. And I walked into her office. I'm like, can I ask you questions? She goes, yeah, I'm really busy. What? And I said, well, how the hell do you do it? Because it takes me an afternoon, a year, a lifetime to do anything, right? How do you get to the point where you just sit down and just churn out amazing stuff in really short order? And she said, oh, I don't know. I hate it. I'm not very good at this. I'm like, you literally one of the most famous people in the business. You're extremely important. You run this magazine. What are you talking about? She looked at me and she said, well, every time I sit down, to make anything, I have to convince myself that I could do it. And to convince myself that I do it, she pointed over to, she had this bookcase in the far corner of her office. She goes, go over there. And that bookcase was full of binders. And she said, I pull out a binder and I look at something I wrote and I go, that's really good. I'm not that good anymore, but I'm going to try. And everything I've done since, like, okay, it might suck, but I can do this. Once I did this, probably not going to be this good, but you got to be okay with it. There's a gun to your head. Stop whining and make the thing. And that was her process, right? And like mine's totally different. Yours is totally different. Anybody who makes anything, it's different. But I just love the idea that half of making anything, you learn how to get around these structures when you make something on deadline for your job, right? You learn how to just make a product you are happy with. It is as good as it's going to get in the amount of time you have to make it. And yet at the same time, part of it is still like learning which parts of your brain to shut up, right? And it's always weird to go back and look at things you made and realize where you were. Like Larry was knee deep in water and had slept for 2 hours or whatever it is. Has how you think about, like when you have total freedom to do, time and composition and you're not shooting under somebody else's clock, has how you think about how you process and think about that work changed? Do you shoot for fun? Do you how do you approach that?
I mean, the easy answer is to shooting for fun is I have to shoot for fun every single time I pick up the camera. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it,
But that's great, right?
Yeah, that is shooting for fun. Yeah, I'm sorry, what was your other question?
No, it was just
shooting for fun.
How you make things. Like, do you and how you think about it? Has that changed? It has to have, right? Especially given the fact that the business is the business now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the really big thing that has changed is I think I kind of touched on this before. The main thing is we just have so much more responsibilities now.
Yeah.
And I can't just do things for the art, for the best picture possible.
Which again is crazy because that's your definition of the thing. And everybody else looks at Larry Chen's work and is like, what? That's art. What are you talking about? This is amazing, right? But that's every artist works, everybody has that barometer, which is just really interesting.
Yeah. A good example is Pikes Peak, right? So we're the official photography team. I've been the official photographer for a couple years now. I think since 2018, I think was our first year. And it is a very, very big responsibility because we're talking about a very historic race. One of the oldest in the world, second oldest in the U.S. Indy 500 is a couple years older. We just had the 100th running. which is just so crazy that an event can happen for this many years. They did break for World War II. Um, it is a very big responsibility, and we take it to heart. Like, I'm so serious about it because now we're documenting this thing for future generations to come. When I'm gone and when all my guys are gone, our pictures will live on. Our pictures and video will live on. And before we had this kind of responsibility, I would just mess around. I would just move from place to place. And it's like, if I miss the shot, oh well, another car is going to come. And then I get to do this super abstract thing to make art, to make it look as good as possible.
Yeah.
You may not even know what the car is, you may not even. And at that time, it's like, who cares? I just wanted to make the best picture possible. But we just can't do that anymore. We have to be responsible. We have to make sure, okay, these next 10 cars, we have to make sure we get tack sharp pictures of these cars. We still want to make the best picture possible, but they have to look good, and they have to have their aesthetic quality to it. But they also have to have their commercial quality, which is, you can see the logos. You can see, if it's an open wheel car, you can see the person in there. If it's a motorcycle, all that. There's just so many aspects to what we do that's very important. I mean, heck, you want to talk about motorcycles? Like our buddy Carlin Dunn, he passed away at Pikes
Yeah,
Peak, and
right.
we literally have the last picture of him alive. And it's so important. What if we missed that picture because we were messing around and we're like, hey, let's do this artsy fartsy thing, But we didn't. We have tack sharp stuff from starting line all the way to, unfortunately, him going down. And that's documenting it for forever, for life, for his mom, for his sister,
Right.
just for history, and we have that. It's that's really the biggest change over time.
You mentioned earlier just the notion that you have to work around how okay, so you don't consider yourself a great technical photographer. Some people would argue, but you don't consider yourself that, right? And that means for you that you have to build in extra time, you have to get up earlier, you have to work harder to get around that. How long did it take you to figure out that was something you needed to compensate for? Because again, we all have processes when we're making things, right? You have to work around the things that you can't do well. Even if it's only you that thinks that you can't do that thing well, it's still a thing you've decided to work around. Did that hit you early, or was it the kind of thing where you looked at everyone else's work and you wanted your work to have one of those qualities, and you had been doing it a while and you were like, oh, I'm going to start changing and thinking differently?
I think so much of it comes from like the way that I see other photographers come up in the ranks.
Okay.
There's so, like, when I first started, I feel like my photography, quality wise, composition, and just like the overall feel of it was pretty on par with some of the better motorsport photographers. But then when I see that there's these very, very talented shooters that are coming up on the ranks just on skill, just based off skill, and they're coming up so much faster, and they're creating these images sometimes when we're at the same place, that's when I'm like, wow, it's very inspiring to see. It's very cool to see what's possible. And I just know that if I want a piece of that, I just have to work that much harder. Mm, it yeah, I think that's really it, because as good as you can possibly be as a business person, um, in the photography world or in video or in this industry, you still have to back it up with some skill. And that that's what I see. I see these photographers that I'm like, wow, I cannot believe that they're able to see these things. It's just, even if we're in the same corner, or even if we're at the same event, or even if the same car is sitting in front of us, I don't know how to explain it. It's just a way to see something different, and you just don't know if it's better until it's created and you look at them side to side, and it's like, wow, that's definitely better for this reason. And that's the cool thing about photography. That's the fun thing about it. There's certain rules that you have to follow. Not really, but and as humans, it's the same thing with music, right? Like there's certain rules you have to follow to make good music, but do you really have to? Some music is just so crazy, for whatever reason, us humans as these beings love it. It's just so crazy to me.
It's the idea
I
of
guess
like,
it's the same.
yeah.
It's the same way with cars. How come some cars look better than others, or some cars are loved more than others?
Well, it's the idea of the learning which there are rules that we break and rules that we don't break, and that those sets are different for everybody, right? And the ones you choose to break and the ones you choose to move around with, play with, that's you. That's anything you make reflects that. And I don't know. There's also this. We've been kind of orbiting obliquely the idea of things going wrong in this whole chat, but I one of the things that I find really interesting about anybody who's made any kind of a career and any kind of a name for themselves is that, especially if they're creating something, but they don't ever sit and they don't ever stop with it, mainly because it is in itself a kind of failure to get 20 years in or 10 years in or 5 minutes in and decide, all right, I am good enough and I'm going to keep going, right? This notion that, like, one of the things you've kept coming back to is just this idea that it's really, really important to never assume you are there, to never assume you have landed it. You are at the top and things are good and things are going to be fine, right? I mean, I know a lot of people in magazines who are like, well, magazines are a thing. They're always going to be a thing. Well, no, they're not. And they're not really anymore.
No.
And,
Yeah.
and if you like working at them, you figure out what you like doing there and you figure out how to take it somewhere else, like storytelling and the images and all of it. But just, I love the idea that you've built this career around like so many people who make stuff. It's so common, but it's so important because so many people who get into the business get to a certain age, like they hit middle age or 10 years in and they think, well, screw it. It's really hard to keep trying. I'm just not going to try anymore, or I'm just going to keep it at this level,
I think I'm maybe a little crazy, but then there's just so many people that are like me,
Yeah.
especially in this industry,
Yeah.
especially surrounded by cars. Just something about cars that kind of drive us for
Yeah.
whatever reason. But I get so many young people that come up to me or message me or reach out to me somehow, and I just don't know why a lot of times they are obviously interested in getting this industry and they're obviously interested in picking up this camera, but it's too easy now for whatever reason to make excuses.
Yeah,
And
totally.
it's kind of, it sucks in a way because I wish they would just try and try hard and, like you say, fail. And then, there's just no easy street. Like even the best people that I see that have come up in this industry on the writing side, on the photography side, video, even if they've done it in the fastest way possible and they've just had a lucky break early on, or if they've created their own break, they've still just gone through so much.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't need to grind like I have for so long. Because I feel like I didn't really have a good turning point until maybe 10 years in. Then it started kind of building up some momentum slowly. But yeah, I mean, I've been shooting now, I could say, events. I've been credentialed photographers for 18 years now.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just not overnight at all. And it is my life. It's pretty much all I know. I don't know how to do anything else except for take pictures of cars. I really don't.
Yeah, I'm the same way. This business evaporates. I'm basically gonna be sweeping floors, cleaning toilets. Like it. That's
Yeah,
it,
yeah, but good. The good thing, again, something I said before we started recording is that I've never been so busy in my life. I'm lucky in that I get to pick and choose what I want
Yeah.
to do now, because there's so many good people and so many good companies, and there's just so much in the car industry, that so many people that want to do good work, that allows us to keep shooting and keep telling stories. And Hagerty, oh my god, they're such a big driving force. You look at the channel right now on YouTube, and it's almost like they've picked up all the best of automotive and put them in one channel, which is just so crazy. They basically said, screw the YouTube algorithm. Let's just do what we want to do,
It is funny, right? And it's a lot of those jobs and a lot of those careers and a lot of those products. It's stuff that, if I can remember being in college and telling people I wanted to write about cars for a living. And the answer from my counselor was basically, cool, man, that's not a real job. Why don't you go be an accountant or literally anything else? And it was like, well, no, you don't understand. I have to, it's like you, right? I can't not do the thing. I have to do the thing. And in the end, so much of it really just comes down to just adapting and looking around and going, well, all right, today is different from yesterday, and I have to think different, and I have to make something new now, and not getting complacent and lazy. And it is weird. I get a lot of people who email me and say, yeah, I love your job. How did you get doing it? And the hard answer, which is, well, you start and then you be really bad at it for a long time, is never what anybody wants to hear, because it's not the sexy answer. And hard work is you in a room or you in a field with water up to your knees, just doing the reps and grinding it out. And that's never, it's one of the reasons we made this podcast, right? Because it's never the thing in the middle is never the sexy thing, but God, it's so important. I don't know, man. I love that you think about this. So we're basically out of time. We've got time for one more thing. It's a thing we do with everybody who comes on the show. And I love it because the answer inevitably says a lot about the person and how they look at things. I'm going to ask you a question, and don't think too much. Just give me an answer. Sound cool?
All right.
So what is the first thing that goes through your head when things go wrong? Everybody laughs.
When things go wrong.
Yeah. First thing pops in your head when something goes apeshit.
That is well, I think I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think to myself, how could I not foresee this?
It's a pretty good answer.
How could I not predict this thing happening?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a good way to. And then the second thing I think is, how can I prevent this from happening ever again?
See, that's it, right? That's it, because it's rooted in doing something different.
Yeah.
Sorry, I get excited.
It is just. It could be the dumbest things, and yeah, it's always something. It's always something dumb. Yeah, like it's hard for me to give you a good example.
No, it's okay. It's a one-liner question. It's you don't have to dive deep on it. I was just curious. It's a good answer. It's one of the better answers we've gotten. Well,
yeah, I think it's just that because that just kind of preps us for the next time something like that goes wrong.
Right. But it goes back to what you're talking about, right? Like, if you're not actively trying to get better, you're basically moving backwards. So, well, Larry, thanks for taking the time. It was great talking to you today. Really appreciate it, man. And good luck with SEMA and everything else coming up.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.